Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing a technique where you paint with water on your ink blended Distress Oxide inks. Let's take a look at the two cards that we're going to be able to make today and jump into the supplies. So I am using the Love You Bunches stamp set from Trinity Stamps and some Distress Oxide inks in Peacock Feathers and Cracked Pistachio. I've also got a water brush here. You need either water and a paintbrush or a water brush to do this technique. And I've also got my Misti. Using my Misti, I am going to stamp out this stamp set onto some Bristol Smooth cardstock. That's my favorite cardstock for ink blending. I'm going to pick up that stamp with the door of my original Misti tool. And then I will use some embossing anti-static powder bag on the cardstock so that I only get the amount of embossing powder on there that will stick just to the stamp. So I'm going to speed this up. I'm going to stamp using Versamark ink. Make sure that I get a really good impression on that cardstock. It is a pretty detailed stamp, so I do want to make sure I'm getting the best impression possible. And then I will go ahead and stamp it a second time just to be sure that everything is in place. That's the beauty of using the Misti tool. I'm going to take some Hero Arts white embossing powder and sprinkle that over the image so that it is completely covered. And then once I have all of the powder on, I will go ahead and heat set using my Wagner heat gun. That's my favorite heat gun. I've had a few and it does the best job, I think. Now that that is heat set, I'm going to go ahead and get out my Oxide inks and my little foam blenders. These are my favorite for Oxide inks. For dye inks, I prefer the blender brushes, but for Oxide inks, I like these foams. Just going in and layering down a generous amount. So you definitely, if you want to do this technique, you need a lot of ink to make this work. So I'm really laying it down thick. So now that I've got that Cracked Pistachio down, I'm going to go in with the Peacock Feathers. This is a new blending foam, so I've got to be, pretty heavy-handed with it at first. I'm blending on my Waffle Flower Water Media Mat. It's my favorite thing to blend on. So just going ahead and putting a generous bit of the Peacock Feathers and then going back in with the Cracked Pistachio to get a good blend in between. You really have got to go back and forth if you want to get a good blend. So just blending away, and once that's done, I can move on to the painting. So I've got my water brush here, and what I do is I squeeze really hard and get a bunch of water out. And what you're going to do is just paint with water. Just put the water where if you were just going to watercolor this image. So for me, that's in between where I have laid down that stamped image with the embossing powder. And then I just go ahead and pick up the water with a paper towel. You could do that with a dry cloth too. I use the same paper towel throughout this entire thing. And what it does is it just it makes that oxidation effect to the panel that you've ink blended. So it makes it whiter and just kind of draws up that color. This is a very subtle effect, but I think it makes for really beautiful cards. By the way, I am using a lot of water. Like my brush is saturated with water and I keep going back to get more. I basically use the entire water brush, all of the water in that brush to do this panel. It is a large image, but you do need a lot of water to make this work. If you don't use as much water, it's not going to be as stark of a contrast between what you have ink blended and what you have painted on. This does not take very long. The coloring portion of this really only took me about 15 minutes. I have it sped up here so that we're not sitting here forever. And in a little bit here, I'm going to cut to more of the end. It's just because it's really repetitive. All you're doing is just coloring in with water. It is really, really simple, but I just love the effect that this gives. I hope that after watching me work on this, that you will want to try this technique out. It'd work with all different kinds of stamps. You don't just have to do it on a floral image. You could do it on lots of different things. I also feel like this is just a way, with floral stamps, I'm always trying to think of different techniques on how I can use them so that I'm not just coloring them with Copics or watercoloring them. This gives me another way to use them. So now that this is nearly complete, we are going to move on to building out the card. So what I'm going to do is just heat set this to make sure that it is completely dry before I move on. So I've heat set this, and then I'm going to wipe off the card panel with that paper towel again, just to make sure I've rubbed any of the oxide off of where I've done the heat embossing. So to make that bright and white again. And then because this panel is a little bit larger than 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, I am just going to use an A2 layers die to cut that out. And then this is always the scary part. I'm going to cut this in half so I can get 2 cards out of it. I feel like we've worked on a panel. Sometimes it's really intimidating to make the cut, but I do go ahead and cut this in half so that I've got 2 panels and can make 2 cards. And I really love how this turns out. So it's definitely worth doing. I am then going to take out a piece of Tranquil Teal cardstock by Gina K Designs, and using my already cut panel as a guide, I am going to cut along the same area or along the same line, I should say, so that these match up. I want to have just a little bit of a border of some colored cardstock to add just a little bit of extra detail to this card. So now that I have cut that, I just move on to the end assembly, which is basically just using a tape runner to adhere the teal cardstock to my blended and stamped panel. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And basically the little teal sticks out about 1/8 of an inch. Not very much, but I do think that this adds just a little bit of interest. So making sure that I've got these 2 assigned correctly so that the way that the cut is going makes sense for both, and just adhering these down. Then I can move on to my sentiment. So once I've got these kind of how I want them, I'm going to take back out my Misti tool, and I'm going to be using the Hello sentiment from this same stamp set. And I'm going to be heat embossing that sentiment using Hero Art's Platinum Embossing Powder. I really like the Platinum Embossing Powder just because while it says platinum, I don't really think it's silver, and it's not really gold either. But it's not champagne. I don't know how to describe it, but it kind of lends to different metal tones, and I really, really love how it turns out. So I'm using the door of my Misti to pick up that stamp. We'll once again use that magic powder tool to make sure that I don't get any extra static and my embossing powder sticks where I want it to. Then I'll once again use Versamark ink to do my stamping. And like I said, I'm going to use that platinum embossing powder to do my embossing with. So just going ahead and doing that stamping, and I've just got that hello going at the same angle as my angled cut panels. Those are not adhered down at this point. They are, I'm just using them as a guide. And I am stamping this sentiment directly onto my card base, which is made from Nina 110 pound solar white cardstock. And just going ahead and brushing off that excess powder. To finish off these cards, all I did was use some foam tape to adhere these panels on. Just gives the card a little bit of dimension, and that's it. Thank you so much for watching this. Please let me know in the comments down below if you're going to try this technique, and I will catch you in the next one. I hope that you subscribe to see more from me. Thank Thank you so much. Have a great day.